So how do you know whether you should incorporate your business or whether you shouldn't? Should you have a sole proprietorship? Should you own properties personally? Do you set up a limited liability partnership? Do you set up a incorporation? What are the different advantages and disadvantages to each? Because I cannot tell you how many times I get messages on Instagram. Mike, do I incorporate my real estate holdings? I have 3 rental properties. Or Mike, I have 2 rental properties. Or Mike, I'm joint venturing with 2 friends of mine. Do I incorporate? And I'm going to answer all these questions for you. This video is going to serve as the video for whether or not you should incorporate. So the next time someone asks me, hey Mike, I'm looking to buy my 2nd rental property, should I incorporate? I'm going to send them this video. Hey everyone, Mike Rosehart here, talking to you today about whether you should incorporate your real estate holdings. But primarily I'm going to focus today on real estate because the answer is, like most things, it depends. It depends on your personal circumstances. It depends on many different facets and factors that play into your decision. What I'm going to do is try to use a broad stroke brush to paint this picture for you so you can get a rough idea. And when I meet up with people, the first thing they ask me is, Mike, I have 2 rental properties. Or Mike, I'm joint venturing with 2 friends of mine. Do I incorporate? Mike, I have 10 properties. Do I incorporate? And I'm going to answer all these questions for you. This video is going to serve as the video for whether or not you should incorporate. I'd love a like button, smash it. I'd love if you subscribe to the channel right at the bottom right of the video. Click that and subscribe. I really appreciate that. And share this with some friends who are also thinking about buying some rental property or wondering whether they should incorporate or not. And let's get the conversation started in the comments. We're going to talk at a high level about some of the advantages and disadvantages, pros and cons of incorporating versus not incorporating. And again, it's going to depend on your personal situation, but we're going to try our best to get through this and make it as understandable as possible. So when we talk about incorporating, an incorporation is a separate legal entity. Effectively, this incorporation would then basically be its own person. It would be taxed on its own. It would be separate from you. And the theory behind incorporating is that you get to protect basically yourself from, as the shareholder, as the individual, from liability, from creditor, and basically have a place where you can shelter your income and choose when you pay yourself through dividends or through a salary. You're in control, right? Through an incorporation, you set up another legal entity that is basically there to own the property or the business. 99% of the time, if you own a business like a dental practice, or you're starting a business, you're selling products, drop shipping online, or you're doing consulting on the side, or you're doing whatever business you're doing, you should incorporate, because there are tons of small business incentives, especially here in Canada, that are to your advantage. You should definitely incorporate. But if you're going to buy real estate properties and collect rental income, passive income, you likely should not hold that inside of a corporation. And here's why. So most people think there are distinct advantages to owning your real estate in a corporation because it's sheltered from liability. But what we found is, more often than not, people who own real estate inside of corporations get almost none of the benefits. So one, the tax treatment is in most situations actually worse unless your income is in the top 0.1% of Canadians. So if you're the 99.5% of Canadians watching this video, you probably shouldn't incorporate. Make 100 grand a year, you probably shouldn't incorporate. You need to be mega rich for it to make a lot of sense, because there are distinct costs associated with it and the advantages are nil. So the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency, has decided that they want to treat income earned within a corporation the same as it would be if you held that property personally. What that means is they tax all rental income inside of your corporation at the top marginal bracket from day one. So you automatically pay at the top. There was a recent, about 6 months or a year ago, they put out some legislation they're looking to pass on the tax code to make it such that passive assets and passive income was basically taxed at 70%. It's now, I believe, in the 50% range, the same as the top marginal bracket. Now, within a corp, you're taxed corporately, and then you withdraw, you get a dividend that'll be grossed up, and you get some sort of tax credit for that dividend, but you pay in the corporation, and then you pay again when you pay yourself through a dividend. So there are 2 layers of tax to owning inside a corporation. So the tax advantages are actually not all that sweet. Unless you're at the very top marginal bracket, then it can make some sense. You can start comparing the scenarios where the legal, accounting, and administrative cost of keeping a corporation open makes sense. So when you set up a corporation, you have to pay your lawyer, sometimes $1,500, $2,000. There are $300 in government fees. There's additional fees you have to set up to register the corp. There are a lot of costs associated with that. You have to have an annual board of directors meeting. There are several different things. You have to record the minutes of that meeting and submit that to the government. You have annual corporate tax filings you have to do as well as personal. So there are a lot of distinct disadvantages to owning real estate in an incorporation. More specifically, the liability protection doesn't actually protect you. If you look at some of the recent litigation cases, what we are seeing is a lot of real estate corporations are piercing the corporate veil. And what that means effectively is when the court decides that they will treat an individual shareholder the same basically as the corporation. They will decide that they were basically one and the same. So when you try to shelter something inside of a corp to protect yourself, they will go after the shareholders effectively for those liabilities. So some people think whatever's inside of my corp, just that, if I put $100,000 inside of my corp and then I buy a bunch of properties with that as a down payment, then I'm only going to lose that $100,000. That is not true. The creditor protection is not as good as you might think, especially if you're piercing the corporate veil. You're not indemnified. You can be sued. You are at risk. So the advantages are not near as large. I don't want to scare anyone. What you need to be doing is setting up a good insurance policy on your rental properties. I'm talking $2 million, $3 million. Maybe someone really, really risk averse wanted to go $5 million liability coverage. That would, with maybe a high deductible if they were less worried about the small minor damage claims, but more concerned about the large liability losses, they would set up that liability policy to protect themselves in an event of being sued from a tenant slipping and falling on ice or someone dying in a fire. You would be protected from those things with a good insurance policy. So my recommendation is to hold personally and to have a really good insurance package set up on your portfolio of properties that protects you. So what do you get by holding personally? You're saying, okay, Mike, there's a lot of costs associated. There's administrative costs. There's time costs associated with setting up a corporation to the tune of thousands of dollars a year in many cases. So it's good for the accountant, it's good for the lawyer, it's good for the admin, it's good for the government. It's less good for you unless you're relatively wealthy. So there are distinct advantages to owning personally. For one, when you buy personally, you get a cheaper interest rate on the property that you're buying. And by the way, guys, when you're buying inside of a corporation, almost all the banks today are going to require you to personally guarantee the mortgage. So you are not free from creditor protection because as a shareholder, you're personally guaranteeing the loans against the properties. So the corporation, again, not doing a whole lot for you, not from a tax perspective, not from a liability perspective, unless you're really, really wealthy, in which case the income sprinkling, the ability to be able to choose when to sprinkle yourself income between different years can make the difference and can be of an advantageous nature to you. But let's talk personally. When you're just getting started, a lot of my real estate holdings, and a lot of people I know actually, I'm looking at a specific case of someone I talked to who bought 2 or 3 properties and they renovated those properties significantly. And so they had significant vacancy, operating expenses, and capital expenditures to make the property more lavish, right? And make it really, really nice. During that time, during those 2 tax years, it spilled over 2 different tax years, call it 2015, 2016. During those years, they had operating and capital losses on that property. When you hold the property personally, the losses can be carried forward against active business income. So I know people who have worked at their jobs for 2 and 3 years while renovating properties and building a portfolio and paid no tax. They used the rental properties to offset their day job income. That's a huge advantage. That's an awesome thing. You really definitely want to look into that. I also had some properties that had operating losses in the beginning, and that's okay because long term, 2 or 3 years after you've had the property, it'll begin to cash flow strong. And yes, you'll create huge capital gains when you sell the property because you've been depreciating things now, but you can choose to pay no tax now and pay tax later. $1 now is worth a lot more than $1 later, so you want to defer that tax as much as possible. So owning properties personally with a good insurance policy protects you from a risk, protects you from really any of the downsides with the liability piece, and there are distinct tax advantages. You can write those losses off. A lot of my properties, I buy them in rough condition, I renovate them, so there are tax losses in the first and second year as I get them off the ground, get them operating into a profitability standpoint. Additionally, you can actually set up a structure wherein you could own 50% with your spouse or your partner and income split the rental properties. You could each have 50% ownership of this rental property and share that rental income between yourselves by owning properties personally and just filling out a T776 form here in Canada. So distinct advantages to owning personally. There are many, many more advantages to owning personally, but I got to go on for live, the Wise Wealth Show. So I'm filming this video right before that, and I just wanted to get out there and say, if you are interested in incorporating your real estate, at least look into a 3-tiered structure. If you have 6 employees, greater than 5 employees, you're considered an active small business income, and the rental income within that corp is then eligible for small business tax rates, which is like 14%, which is fantastic. If you have 6 employees, you should definitely be buying real estate inside of a corp. Most people don't have 6 full-time employees or more than 10 part-time employees, so it doesn't make sense to own real estate, passive assets like real estate that generate rental income, which is again, passive income. It makes no sense to own that inside of a corporation. You should probably own that personally. But maybe I'm wrong. I'd love to know in the comments if you think I'm wrong, why am I wrong? And I'd love to have it out back and forth about some of the advantages and disadvantages to owning property and whether you incorporate or whether you don't incorporate. So it depends on each person's financial situation. At the end of the day, it comes down to some things like, sometimes it comes down to ownership and setting up different classes of shares. Maybe you decide that's the big thing that differentiates the incorporation from the personal holdings, even if it's worse from a tax perspective, and maybe if it has no benefit from a liability perspective. And of course, if you're buying big commercial buildings, it can make sense. The problem is if you set up a corporation for each and every property, each isolated unit in a proper 3-tiered structure, that's very expensive to do, and it doesn't make sense on a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 rental property. It just doesn't make sense when you put those costs over it. The advantages definitely seem, in my opinion, to not be as strong as the costs associated. So that's today's really quick video. I'd love to hear about it in the comments if you found value here and what your thoughts are on incorporating versus not incorporating. I don't think it makes a whole lot of sense. The numbers I've crunched have made sense that I don't have an incorporation for any of my 9 personal rental properties. So I've not been incorporating, and it's worked out very well for me. And I'm happy to share why it worked for me and why now I'm starting to incorporate and do things a little bit differently at the stage that I'm at now. So that's today's video. I hope you guys really enjoyed it. Thank you all so much. A share means so much to me. If you found some value, please share this somewhere. That's all I ask. And as always, guys, you know the routine. To unlock a wealthier you need to spend less, earn more, and maximize your returns. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bye, guys. See you for the next episode. Hey, everyone. Mike Rosehart here in an echoing environment. Okay.
The only thing I touched was the shutter speed. That was it.
Hey, everyone. Testing. Mike is going to do a video on whether you should incorporate your real estate holdings. Do you incorporate? Do you own them personally? This is a question I get all the time. Okay, test.